Welcome back to my channel. I am Jason, and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews. So I just watched the third episode of Lupin Season 1. And I have to say, it seems like each episode is getting better and better. I just like the way the story is being told and how each episode is connected and you're finding out something different. How pieces are connected in each episode. So, it opens with this couple, they're waking up, and they're kind of going through their morning routines, getting the kids up, getting them dressed for school, they're getting ready for work, the coffee and the whole thing. And so the guy ends up asking his, Alexa or something, I don't know what that was, to play I Can See Clearly. And so I guess that's one of their favorite songs, and it played, and they hugged and kissed or whatever the case is, and they dispersed and kind of left for the day. Each went to work and went on with their day. So we find out that this guy is Dumont and his family, and he is in a meeting at City Hall. So during this meeting, a guy walks in and basically tells him that he's from IT and that they need to update some software on his computer, and that he found some other stuff on his computer. And he said he wanted to, it's kind of personal. And so Dumont didn't want to, I guess he initially didn't want to leave the room until the guy said, I found porn on your computer. And of course he said it loud enough where the other people in the meeting could hear. So they kind of turned to look at Dumont like, what you doing on your work computer? What? Okay, so he ushers him out the room. And Arsène is now, he's Max. So he's basically, Dumont is saying, do you think that I will come to work and look up porn on my computer? And Arsène is saying, well, no, that is something that you would do at home. And Dumont got offended. Like, I don't look at porn. He's like, hey, I'm not trying to judge, but we do need to take care of this. So while this conversation is happening, this woman who I don't think they identified, she walked up and she was like, oh, was your meeting over already? And they talked, and she was like, he said that there were some technical issues or something. And the woman said, well, where's Michael? And so Arsène, aka Max, and Dumont looked at her like, who's Michael? And she ends up saying, well, he's the guy that typically handles this kind of stuff. And so now Dumont is suspicious, and Max is saying that, I think he's not here or he's on vacation, and that, I'm here to kind of fill in. And so Dumont ends up asking to see his ID. And of course, Max gets indignant and like, how dare you? And what are you trying to say? And, of course it's loud, and, it's not my fault that you got porn on your computer. And he accused them of being racist, and eventually he just said, whatever. I mean, he did have an ID and he showed it, briefly flashed it, but I think he just wanted, to just go in and get whatever he needed to do over with. So for some odd reason, he was following, instead of Arsène following Dumont to his office, Dumont was following Arsène, and Arsène ends up taking him down some corridor. And he's saying, wait a minute, this is not the way to my office. And I'm like, you didn't know that before you hit the corner or went through those doors? Like, what's going on here? So, eventually, Arsène ends up using some pressure points to incapacitate Dumont. He takes his cell phone and takes it apart. And so, the next thing you see is Arsène, he's pulling this trunk out through one of the side doors, and you can see he's wearing this bright orange hat, and him and this guy is loading it into the back of a van, and so the van pulls off. So eventually Dumont wakes up, he's handcuffed to a chair, of course he has no idea what's going on, and Arsène is up in another room. He has like a camera set up where they make it a point, you could clearly see like there's 3 hours, like 3.5 hours on this recording. And he has a monitor set up where he could show videos and documents and that kind of stuff, so Dumont can see what he's talking about. And he ends up showing a picture of photos of his father. And he asked him, do you remember this guy? And you can see by Dumont's reaction that he does remember him. But Arsène ends up saying, well, I know that, as time goes on, memories fade, as you get older, but I'll help jog your memory. So I'm like, what he about to do? He gonna go from thievery to what? To assault? What you about to do? So there is a flashback of there's a meeting between Pellegrini and Dumont. Dumont came to his house to give him an update on the investigation. And Dumont is basically saying that Babacar is, denying having anything to do with the theft of that necklace. And Pellegrini ends up referring to Babacar as he's a clever ape. And Dumont kind of stopped in his tracks, kind of looked at him, and Pellegrini said, "Oh well, I probably shouldn't have said that, but I knew that he would. I knew that he would argue." And then he ends up saying, "Guilty people always deny," and Dumont ends up saying, "Well, innocent people deny as well." And so he starts asking. Dumont starts asking him about the insurance on the necklace. He's like, I see that you increased the policy on the necklace shortly before the theft. And Pellegrini is saying that, oh, well, it was undervalued. And so a friend of his who, I guess, appraised the necklace at a lot more. So that's why he increased the policy. And he even offered to give him the friend's number, which Dumont appreciated. He then started saying that, during the investigation, Dumont is saying that, for all intents and purposes, Babacar is a great guy. He doesn't have a criminal record. All of his neighbors, they praise him. He's this hardworking guy, this single father. Like, he doesn't fit the profile of someone who would do something like this. And so Pellegrini says, so there's a profile. And Dumont ends up saying, a criminal can be the person you least expect. And Pellegrini kind of got offended, like, well, what are you trying to say? And basically, Dumont is saying that, I'm just trying to do my job. And, it's, if and when we have some updates, I'll let you know. So back in the dungeon, Arsène is kind of flashing through these reports. I think it was the deposition report, the investigation report, and the autopsy report. And he's saying that your name was on all of these reports. And he's asking him, why did you frame him? And Dumont, of course, is denying that he framed him. And he's saying that, my name are on these reports because I was the lead investigator. So, I would kind of be involved in most, aspects of the case. And he goes into, you didn't really investigate and look for the necklace, and you never found it, because once you had a guy who had, Babacar in custody, or you had him in custody, you felt like you already had your man, and basically it was a BS investigation, and you had him sign a BS confession, and Dumont ends up telling him that you don't know what you're talking about. And, of course, Arsène is like, okay, so explain it to me. And so he ends up saying that I requested that he sign the confession because just in case I was afraid that he might recant. And so Arsène is saying that, well, because he was innocent. And Dumont starts going into, I've been on the force for 30 years and I know innocent people. And basically, he wasn't innocent. He was guilty of the crime. And so, back at the police station, Yusuf, he has the 1995 case file material on his desk. He's realizing that some things are missing, and he's on the phone, like, making inquiries about something, but there's some, like, missing pages or something to the report. So, this is when Sophia, she rushes in, looking hurried, and he's trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. And this is when he tells her that this is when they find out that Dumont has been kidnapped, he's missing, he's disappeared, whatever the case may be. And so they're kind of jumping into gear to try to find out what's going on with him. And so Captain Benjamin comes in and kind of tells them that, he was in a meeting on the 3rd floor, and the last time people saw him, he was talking to this tech guy who was wearing this bright orange hat, and, no one has seen him since. so Arsène starts asking Dumont about his finances. He's basically telling him that even with your salary, you can't afford the lifestyle that you have. Which of course is interesting, because that would be known to most people, like, well, how much do you actually make that you could live the way you live? But again, anywho, and then he starts going into he's made some connections to Dumont and quite a few criminals, and how he's been taking bribes and, you know, all the stuff under the table, how he has these accounts, these secret accounts, which are not so secret. And Dumont basically said, so are you going to go to internal affairs? And he said, no, that would be too easy. And he said, but your wife, on the other hand. And he ends up calling Dumont's house, and his wife answered the phone. And Dumont is trying to talk to her, and he ends up telling him, you know, don't waste your breath. She can't hear you. And he didn't say anything either. But you can hear his wife, who's very concerned, because at this point she is aware that he's missing. And then Dumont starts going into how, you know, why he took that money, how he took that money for his kids, and how he would do anything for them. Like, he, you know, it wasn't to live this lifestyle. Well, I mean, it was to provide a better life for his children. And he's trying to make the connection between that and Babacar, basically saying that he was from Senegal. He came here without any money in his pocket. He had this child to raise, and so he can understand when people make desperate decisions. And of course, the son is like, no, my father. He didn't say my. He's like, no. He was innocent. He's still on, he was innocent. So eventually he just disconnected the call, and he ends up telling Arsène that he's thirsty, and he ends up taking him a bottle of water. And so by the time he makes it back up to the room, where the monitors were, his cell phone rings, and it's Claire. And Claire is calling to ask about, so what did you get Raul, their son? And you could tell by his reaction that he forgot. And she could tell by his response that he forgot. And he tried to play it off like, well, no, I have a big surprise. I'm planning something big for him. And then she said, you did the same thing to me last year. And she's like, well, what could be so important that you would forget, something like this? And, she starts talking to him because, she's known him for forever. And she knows that something is up with him. And she basically told him that if he, even though they're not together anymore, that she's still his friend and that he could always talk to her. And, it kind of ended on that note. And so then there's a flashback of when he and Claire actually met. They were at school. And Claire was, they were in class. There was class change, the bell rung. Some of the students left, some stayed. Claire was one of the students that stayed in the same class. There were three boys in there as well. For some reason, they go over to Claire's desk and start just being jerks. Arsène walks in and asks her if she was okay. Eventually, the three guys turn on him. The teacher walks in just before, I guess, what was about to hit the fan. And they all sat down. So Arsène ends up sitting next to Claire. And then she makes a comment about there are two types of guys, barbarians and knights. Barbarians invade your space, while knights treat you like you're some fragile, needy woman in need of a savior, or something to that effect. And so she was kind of, I guess he was kind of looking at her like, well, God, I was just all up, I thank you, that suffice. But then it was funny because he was sitting kind of close to her, and then he kind of shifted in his seat after she said that. And then she asked him his name, and then she realized who he was, and what happened with his dad. And she told him how sorry she was about what happened with his father. And you can see that they, were going to become friends at this point. So back at the police station, they're watching the video, and they have the footage of Arsène, because that bright orange hat, dragging this case out and loading it into a van. And so they're kind of tracking this van through the streets to see where it went. And while they're trying to track Dumont's cell phone, and they're not able to get a trace on the cell phone, they're like, oh, he must have taken the SIM card out. And Yusuf chimed in and was like, well, police phones are a little different. There's a GPS in the battery. As long as the phone is still powered, they could they could use the battery to locate the phone. And so he knew how to do that. So he kind of got in there and was working on trying to pinpoint where this phone is located. Obviously, they're trying to do this before the phone dies and they lose whatever, I guess, connection they have to Dumont. So Arsène is showing Dumont like video of his family. I don't know if that was a live feed or just it was a recording of some sort. And then he starts, telling him, I know all about your family. And then he played a clip of Arsène Dumont from that morning where he stepped on the scale and he was talking about how fat he was. And then he tweaked it and he said that obviously he called it it's a deep fake where they could take video and alter them to make it appear that the person is doing and saying something that they didn't initially do. And he started telling him how he started giving him examples of how he can tweak this photo. Like instead of him saying I'm fat, he could make him say I'm a pedophile or something like that. And so he basically threatened to create one of these and release it to the news. And they end up, of course, the emotions got high. And he's like, I already told you that I didn't frame anybody. And I don't know, what do you want from me? And eventually Arsène ends up saying, well, I want to know why you framed my dad. And then Pellegrini has this flashback, not Pellegrini, Dumont has this flashback of when he was in Arsène's apartment, and he's starting to remember how Arsène, obviously as a child. And so back at the police station, Youssef finally pinpoints the GPS location, and of course they all pour out to get to this location as quickly as possible. And then, we go back to Arsène and Dumont is saying how he remembered him and how he apologized for the way he spoke to him. And he asked Arsène for forgiveness. He ends up saying that, I know, your father was a good man. Basically, even good men, get tempted to get put. They're in situations where they do things that they wouldn't normally do. And he starts using himself as an example. And he's telling him how, you're upset because you think that I forced your father to sign this confession, but you're doing the same thing to me. And the only difference is I'm innocent. And so there's another flashback, and there's it's Arsène and Claire. They're in the park, and they're reading. So of course he's still reading Lupin's Arsène Lupin's book, and the three boys that he was about to get into a fight with in class saw them. And so, of course, they had to go over and start some shenanigans. But before they got there, Claire is asking him about the book and about Lupin. And she was like, well, so what's he? She basically asking him about the character. Like, is he like a Romeo character? And so Hassan's going to explaining to her about Lupin and the story and about the guy. And so the three boys walk up and they start talking trash, and Claire is basically telling Arsène to just ignore them and remember what I said about the barbarians and the knights. And one of the guys pulled out this lighter. They said something, and then it set Arsène off, and then they get into a scuffle. The next thing you know, Arsène and Claire are in the bathroom, and she's kind of like trying to clean some of his bruises and scrapes. And then he goes in to try to kiss her, and she's like, "Wait, what are you doing?" And he was like, "Well, you said I was your boyfriend." And she was like, "Well, you're the man of my dreams, but you're just and you're the only boy, the friend that I have that's a boy." But she's like, "No, it's not like that." And then they started talking and they're laughing, and then he said that Lupin always has a motive for the things that he do, and then he pulls out the lighter. So he ends up picking the guy's pocket. He wanted the lighter, so I guess that was his way of getting the lighter from the guy. And so they both laughed about it, right? So there was this quick flash of the police. They're kind of speeding through the streets, trying to get to this location. Arsène ends up saying, I always say that people don't change. I want to believe that you're telling me the truth. And so for that reason, I forgive you. And you can clearly see that there's 3 minutes left on this recording. So the police pull up and they find the van. And of course they run in on the guy and he's completely confused. And they go into the back of the van. The case is still there. They open the case and this like blow up clown pops out. And they find the cell phone and they're like, oh, this guy's toying with us. He's just screwing with us. And they're like, well, what happened to the guy that was with you earlier today? And he said, oh, well, the guy paid me 200 euros to drop him off at City Hall. And they said, well, where did you take him after that? Where did you drop him off at? He said, City Hall. And they get frustrated. They're like, no, we're not saying where did you take him. We're saying where did you drop him off at after? He said City Hall. I was supposed to drop him off at City Hall and then go around back and park at some place and wait for him, something to that effect. And so Yusuf, his brain started turning. He was like, they're still at City Hall. So it's like, okay, if he dropped them off there, that means that he never left. And so they're like, well, why are you coming up with that? And then he refers back to the book. And of course, they're like, okay, you know what? We about sick of you and we got sick of you in these books. So, but in the end, you see a scene, you see Arsène leaving the building. He has his traditional little trench on or whatever, just like anybody in the streets taking a casual stroll. And the police all pull up. They run into the building, and of course they end up going to the basement, and they find Dumont still handcuffed to the chair. So there's another flashback of Claire and Arsène. They're in the dorms, and she's asking him, don't you ever get tired of reading the same book? And he was like, well, no, because every time I read it, I learn something different. And so, he went back to the statement she made about there are two types of guys, the barbarian and the knight. And he was like, well, maybe there's a third guy. And she's like, a third guy? He was like, well, yeah, a guy that only cares about what's important and, a guy that plays the games and play the game and respect the rules, a gentleman. And she was like, I like hanging, I like spending time with you. And so they talked a little bit, and he finally got that kiss that he so desired, right? So back at the police station, Sophia and Captain Benjamin, they walk in. Sophia's trying to figure out what's going on. He was in the building all this whole time, and he can't tell us anything about this guy, even though because people saw him talking to the guy in the orange, on the orange hat. Even the woman who walked up and talked about, referred to Michael. And so she thinks that something is weird and, why he's not being forthcoming with information. Eventually, Benjamin tells her that, he's going to probably put his own guys on this. And he's, told her that he wanted her to go back to working on the necklace case. So Yusuf ends up calling the captain over and wanted to share his theories. You can see Sophia kind of telling him, I wouldn't say anything now. But he went ahead and he had the photo, that kind of grainy photo that they couldn't make out the face of Arsène in this orange hat. And he's saying that I think that this is Paul Serini. It's all the same guy. And so he, have this whole board up, and the captain was like, well, are you trying to say that all these cases are connected? And then he ends up pulling out the 1995 case file, which I'm trying to confuse as to why none of the officers thought to do that. I mean, you have the same necklace being stolen, and yet somehow Yusuf was the only person that decided to refer back to the old case file. Because and the reason I say that is because when he pulled out the case file and gave it to them, and he showed that Dumont was the investigating officer, they are, Captain and Sophia looking at each other like, oh, wow. And I'm like, why did you not know that? Why did you not know that? Okay. But, so now now you can see that the investigation is about to go into a different direction. So, Dumont is dropped off at home. And he went into the house, and then he realized that the cameras are everywhere. So he started tearing through his house to pull each camera out. Now, it quickly flashed to Arsène while he's watching him disable all these cameras. And so after that, Mr. Pellegrini is now, there's another flashback of Dumont meeting with Pellegrini again. And this is where it fills in some of the gaps from, was it the second episode? I think it's the second episode. And he, Mr. Pellegrini, Dumont is basically telling him that we have evidence that Babacar was somewhere else and that he couldn't possibly have anything to do with this. And our forensics department is saying that those fingerprints were planted there. And Mr. Pellegrini is asking him, well, who do you think did that? And he didn't say anything. Dumont didn't say anything. And he said, I'm sure you have theory. And Mr. Pellegrini starts going into, you have talking about his wife, how his wife is a nurse, and how, she works these late hours, and how accidents happen, and he's low-key threatening to do something to his wife. And he started basically telling him that he know all the right people, so whatever he wants to happen, he can make happen. And he's telling him that he wants Dumont to get Babacar to sign a confession. Babacar was like, he's not going to sign the confession. And this is where Mrs. Pellegrini come in. He said, no, I want you to get my wife to get Babacar to sign a confession. Because he knew that Babacar he was fond of his wife. He respected his wife. And so, what he didn't tell Mrs. Pellegrini is what we find out in this conversation, which is Dumont ends up saying, okay, so if he signs a confession, but he doesn't produce the necklace, he's going to get the maximum sentence. And so Mr. Pellegrini says, I know that, but he doesn't. And don't tell my wife either. So he knew when he sent Mrs. Pellegrini in there to get him to sign this confession that Babacar would get they wouldn't honor whatever the agreement was. She thought they had, that he would get the maximum sentence. And he agreed to those terms. And you can kind of see how is rolling over in his mind, is playing on his conscience now. And so after his shower, he went to have a drink. And then he ends up making calls saying that he wanted to this person, saying that there's a new player and how he needs to talk to him about Babacar Diop. And, they make an appointment to meet. And only at the end of the conversation, he either said thank you or I'll see you then, Mr. Pellegrini. We know he was talking to Mr. Pellegrini. So as soon as he got off the phone with him, his wife arrived, and of course she's ecstatic to see him. They kiss, and then he tells the little thing to play I Can See Clearly, and it started playing some other song, and he was saying, he started yelling I Can See Clearly, but it wouldn't play that song. And then when he would ask for that song, I Can See Clearly, it would say don't recognize the request or something to that effect. So it was obvious that there was clearly something wrong with this, but they were so into each other that I guess they didn't even notice. And then eventually it started playing the conversation that he had just had with Mr. Pellegrini. And so he took the thing and started smashing it. And his wife was looking at him have this moment where he just flashed and he starts destroying this machine. And then it just kept saying Mr. Pellegrini. Oh, thank you, Mr. Pellegrini. He kept saying Mr. Pellegrini's name. And she's now standing there looking at him. He's standing there and he's all sweating and all flustered and frustrated. And then you flash to Hassan, and he has a smirk on his face. And what's so confused, another confusing moment in the show is that, okay, you stated that you've been a police officer for 30 years. Now, you knew that there was video recording equipment in your home. Why did you not think that your phones would be tapped and they may possibly be mics there as well? Just a question. Anywho, I'm going to end this here, and you guys, I will talk to you later.